November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas, 12:30 in the afternoon. A presidential motorcade turns onto Elm Street. Crowds line the road. Children wave small American flags. Jackie Kennedy is wearing pink. And then, 3 shots. In the seconds that followed, the most powerful country on earth lost its president. And for the 61 years that followed, the most powerful intelligence agency on earth worked very hard to make sure you never found out why. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is what the declassified files say. In 2025, the Trump administration released the latest tranche of long-suppressed JFK assassination documents. Files that the CIA had successfully blocked, delayed, and redacted for more than 6 decades. What they contained wasn't just evidence about a murder. It was evidence about a system of covert operations, institutional deception, and deliberate obstruction that transformed this country and is still shaping it today. Beneath the headlines about the grassy knoll and the magic bullet, there is a different story, a harder story. One about what the CIA was in 1963, what it did, and what it was willing to protect. Here is what the files finally reveal. To understand Dallas, you have to understand the institution Kennedy was fighting. The CIA was created in 1947. Truman's signature, the National Security Act. The official mandate: gather intelligence, protect the nation, never be caught off guard again. Pearl Harbor had taught America what happens when you stop watching. But from the very beginning, there were 2 CIAs. There was the analytical CIA, scholars, linguists, historians reading foreign newspapers and filing reports. And then there was the other CIA, the one that didn't file reports, the one that changed governments. They called it covert action. Iran, 1953. A democratically elected prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized his country's oil supply. The CIA organized his removal. They called it Operation Ajax. The Iranian people called it the destruction of their democracy. Guatemala, 1954. A democratically elected president named Jacobo Arbenz began reforming his country's land system, land that happened to belong to the United Fruit Company, whose legal counsel happened to be the CIA's own director, Allen Dulles. The CIA organized his overthrow. They called it Operation PB Success. You have to understand what those 2 operations tell us. The CIA was not protecting democracy. It was removing it, country by country, anywhere it conflicted with American strategic or corporate interests. And the man running this machine was Allen Dulles, Director of Central Intelligence, former Wall Street lawyer, brilliant, ruthless, accountable to no one. By 1960, that license had expanded to include a program with a bureaucratic name and a monstrous purpose. It was called ZRRIFILE. Its function, documented in the declassified files, was the organized assassination of foreign leaders: Castro, Patrice Lumumba, others. The CIA had become an instrument of murder, operating in the name of the United States government, with no democratic mandate, no judicial oversight, and no public knowledge. And then Kennedy won the presidency, and he started asking questions. Here is what the history books don't tell you about the Kennedy presidency. It was not a presidency at war with foreign enemies. It was a presidency at war with its own intelligence apparatus. It started at the Bay of Pigs. April 1961. The CIA had spent months training Cuban exiles in Guatemala. The plan? Invade Cuba, topple Castro, restore American influence 90 miles off the Florida coast. Allen Dulles presented it to Kennedy as a proven blueprint, the same playbook that had worked in Guatemala and Iran. What he didn't tell Kennedy was that the plan only functioned if Kennedy provided American air cover that would constitute an act of war. Kennedy refused. The invasion collapsed within 72 hours. 1,200 Cuban exiles were captured on the beach. It was a public humiliation on a global stage. And the CIA spent the following 2 years making certain that history blamed the president who had refused to pull the trigger. Kennedy fired Dulles publicly. He told his senior staff that he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. That quote was never meant to leave the room. But it did. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy again broke from his intelligence community. Rather than using CIA back channels to negotiate with Khrushchev, he bypassed the agency entirely, sending his brother Bobby through a direct line to Soviet military intelligence. The CIA felt sidelined, humiliated. By the autumn of 1963, Kennedy was planning to pull American military advisors out of Vietnam. He had signed a nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviets. He was dismantling systematically the Cold War architecture that the CIA had spent 15 years building. He had made powerful enemies, and the declassified files tell us exactly how close those enemies were. The most important word in the declassified files is not conspiracy. It is prior knowledge. The FBI was intercepting Lee Harvey Oswald's mail before November 22nd. This is not an allegation. It is documented in a declassified memo written by J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, 2 days after the assassination. The FBI knew that Oswald had contacted the Cuban embassy and the Soviet embassy in Mexico City in September 1963, 8 weeks before Dallas. The CIA knew as well. Oswald had an active file at Langley. His movements were flagged and monitored. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. A CIA officer named George Joannides was running an anti-Castro Cuban exile group in Miami in 1963, an organization called the Directorate Revolutionary Studentil, the DRE. The declassified files reveal that this group had direct, documented contact with Lee Harvey Oswald in the weeks before the assassination. Joannides was never called to testify before the Warren Commission. He was never identified as a relevant witness. He was, in fact, later assigned by the CIA as the agency's official liaison to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the 1979 congressional investigation, specifically convened to examine whether the CIA had prior knowledge of the plot against Kennedy. The CIA sent the man who ran assets connected to Oswald to manage the investigation into the CIA's connection to Oswald. That is not incompetence. That is something else entirely. And then there is the Warren Commission itself, convened by Lyndon Johnson 6 days after the assassination. Its conclusion delivered in September 1964. Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman. One man, one rifle, one bullet that defied physics to wound both the president and the governor of Texas simultaneously. What the declassified files establish is that the Warren Commission was not given the full picture. The CIA withheld its knowledge of ZR Rifle, the assassination program, from the commissioners. It withheld its awareness of the CIA mob plots against Castro. It withheld its knowledge of George Joannides and his connections to Oswald's network. The commission did not reach the wrong conclusion because its members were corrupt. It reached the wrong conclusion because it was fed selected evidence by the very institution it was investigating. 15 years later, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reviewed the same evidence and concluded, in 1979, that Kennedy was probably assassinated as the result of a conspiracy. Their specific finding, with a probability of 95% or better, a second shot was fired from the grassy knoll. 2 government investigations, 2 contradictory conclusions, and over 4,000 files still classified today. What is in those files that the CIA will not let you see 60 years after the murder of an American president? This is the part that connects 1963 to the world you are living in right now. The assassination of John F. Kennedy did not just end a presidency. It ended an era of institutional trust. And what grew in its place has shaped every organ of American power in the decades since. In 1975, a Senate investigation led by Senator Frank Church tore open the CIA and published what it found inside. ZR Rifle. COINTELPRO, the FBI program to surveil, infiltrate, and destroy American civil rights organizations. MK-Ultra, the CIA program that tested mind control and psychological manipulation on unwitting American citizens. Operation Mockingbird, the alleged program to plant CIA-approved narratives inside the American press. The American public discovered that their intelligence agency had been conducting experiments on its own citizens, organizing assassinations of foreign leaders, running psychological operations inside American borders. The result? The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the Inspector General for Intelligence, congressional oversight committees, legal constraints on covert action. Every single structural reform of American intelligence that exists today traces back in a direct line to the questions that Dallas made it impossible to keep ignoring. But there is a second consequence, a darker one. When the state lies to its citizens about how their president died, when the official investigation is built on withheld evidence and the agency under investigation manages its own inquiry, it creates something that cannot be undone. It creates a template. Once you know that the Warren Commission was assembled from incomplete information, you cannot unknow it. Once you understand that the official story was constructed by the same institution with the most to lose from the truth, the question is no longer whether governments can lie. The question becomes, when aren't they? Every conspiracy theory, every deep state allegation, every moment of institutional distrust in American life across the last 60 years, they all share a birth date. November 22nd, 1963. The files don't just tell us who killed Kennedy, they tell us how we became who we are. The 2025 releases did not give us the smoking gun. They rarely do. What they gave us was confirmation of what the documents have always suggested, that the CIA knew more than it disclosed, that the investigation was shaped, quietly, deliberately, by the institution being investigated. And that over 4,000 files remain classified, not because they endanger national security in 2025, but because some institutions never stop protecting themselves. Here is what we know with certainty. The FBI was monitoring Oswald before the assassination. The CIA was aware of his movements. The Executive Action Committee ran an organized assassination program in the name of the United States government. The Warren Commission was never given the complete picture, and the House Select Committee concluded, with 95% confidence, that Kennedy died as the result of the conspiracy. All of this is in the documents. What we don't know, what they will not let us know, is who gave the order. And until those remaining 4,000 files are unsealed, that question remains the most consequential unanswered question in American history. Because here's the thing. This wasn't just an assassination. It was the moment America discovered that its own government had a shadow. And every headline you read today, every story about intelligence agencies, covert operations, institutional deception, has its roots in a motorcade on Elm Street in Dallas at noon on a Friday in November. The modern world was not designed. It was decided in rooms we were never meant to know about. If this opened up a part of history you thought you understood, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Epoch Insight, and hit the notification bell. And let us know in the comments, what do you think is in those 4,000 files they still won't release?